It was supposed to become one of the most historic royal photographs of the century, a carefully staged coronation portrait designed to project unity, stability, and continuity after years of royal chaos. But according to whispers emerging from deep inside Buckingham Palace, Princess Catherine made a decision that stopped the entire operation cold. She would not stand beside Queen Camilla. And within hours, courtiers were scrambling to contain what insiders now describe as one of the most explosive private confrontations since the sun-drenched coronation of 2023. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What made the situation so unsettling was not simply the alleged refusal itself, but the silence that followed it. Palace operations reportedly continued behind closed doors with an intensity usually reserved for moments of constitutional instability, not portrait scheduling. Buckingham Palace had spent weeks preparing the official coronation image, a symbolic photograph intended to reassure the public that the monarchy had entered a new era of calm after years of scandals, fractures, memoirs, and public betrayals. Senior photographers were quietly brought in. Stylists, royal dress advisors, communications staff, and protocol officials allegedly coordinated every detail with military precision because the portrait was expected to become one of the defining royal images of the decade. But insiders now claim that something shifted the moment final positioning arrangements were discussed. Reports suggest Catherine was informed of the proposed standing order beside Camilla only shortly before the session, and according to several palace whispers, her reaction stunned even seasoned aides who had survived decades of royal tensions. Various interpretations of the incident describe the atmosphere turning instantly cold. Some claim Catherine questioned the symbolism behind the arrangement itself, while others insist the future Princess of Wales had reached a private emotional limit after months of growing friction behind palace walls. Whatever the truth may be, insiders agree on one detail with chilling consistency. The portrait session was suddenly delayed under vague explanations involving technical adjustments, and within minutes staff members were allegedly instructed not to discuss the change with anyone outside the immediate household circle. That level of secrecy immediately raised suspicions among palace veterans because official royal portraits are normally controlled with relentless confidence. Yet this time, confusion reportedly spread through Buckingham Palace corridors faster than aides could contain it. Royal commentators later noted unusual scheduling shifts, altered press timing, and visible strain among communications staff trying desperately to preserve the illusion of stability. According to reports circulating within royal media circles, Prince William quietly backed Catherine's position behind closed doors, a detail that transformed what might have been dismissed as a personal disagreement into something far more dangerous for the institution itself. Because if the heir to the throne was now privately aligning against Camilla's influence, then the palace was no longer dealing with ordinary tension. It was facing the possibility of an internal power divide at the very top of the monarchy. And perhaps most troubling of all, insiders claim this confrontation did not emerge suddenly. For months, whispers had allegedly circulated about competitors, royal factions, strained interactions during private gatherings, and growing disagreements over hierarchy, access, and influence inside King Charles's increasingly fragile court. Publicly, smiles remained carefully rehearsed. Appearances continued. The monarchy projected order. But behind the ceremonial perfection, reports suggest an icy cold war had already been taking shape between Catherine and Camilla long before the portrait crisis finally exposed the cracks. But the real reason Catherine allegedly drew this line wasn't about a photograph, it was about a growing battle over who would truly shape the monarchy's future after Charles. For years, the palace presented the women of the monarchy as perfectly synchronized symbols of royal stability. Public smiles, carefully choreographed appearances, shared balcony moments. But insiders now claim the harmony was never quite real. Behind the velvet curtains and polished state banquets, a silent power struggle had allegedly been unfolding between two very different visions of the crown. What made the alleged divide so dangerous was the fact that both women represented completely different futures for the monarchy itself. Catherine had, slowly become the emotional center of the modern royal family. Not through force, not through palace maneuvering, but through patience, restraint, and an image of unwavering duty that resonated deeply with the public during some of the monarchy's darkest years. While scandals erupted around the institution and public trust wavered under relentless pressure, Catherine's calm presence reportedly became one of the few stabilizing forces senior royals believed could protect the crown from further damage. Palace insiders whisper that even some veteran courtiers privately viewed her as the monarchy's long-term survival strategy. The figure most capable of rebuilding emotional trust between the royal family and the British public after years of turbulence. But according to various interpretations emerging from royal circles, that growing influence also created quiet unease within Queen Camilla's camp. Reports suggest Camilla had spent years fighting to secure legitimacy inside an institution that had once viewed her as deeply controversial. And after finally reaching the throne beside Charles, sources claim she had no intention of allowing her influence to slowly fade into ceremonial irrelevance. As Charles's health struggles increasingly dominated palace concerns, insiders allege an invisible battle for access, authority, and future influence quietly intensified behind closed doors. Courtiers reportedly began aligning themselves into subtle factions, some gravitating toward the future, represented by William and Catherine, others remaining loyal to Camilla and the shrinking inner circle surrounding the king. According to palace whispers, tensions began surfacing in ways the public could not immediately detect. Seating arrangements reportedly became subjects of quiet negotiation. Access to private meetings allegedly grew more restricted. Even seemingly minor protocol decisions were now interpreted through the lens of succession optics and future royal hierarchy. What once appeared to outsiders as routine palace administration allegedly became a battlefield of symbolism and control. And hovering above all of it was the growing contrast between the public perception of the two women themselves. Catherine's popularity continued rising with remarkable consistency, particularly among younger audiences and traditional royal supporters alike, while Camilla still carried the weight of decades-old public resentment that never fully disappeared despite official efforts to rehabilitate her image. Insiders claim this imbalance created an uncomfortable reality inside Buckingham Palace because one woman symbolized continuity and renewal, while the other remained tied, fairly or unfairly, to some of the monarchy's most painful historical fractures. According to several royal commentators, King Charles allegedly found himself trapped between personal loyalty to Camilla and institutional pressure surrounding William and Catherine's future role. Sources close to palace operations claim Charles repeatedly attempted to keep peace between both camps, urging aides to minimize tension and preserve unity at all costs. But as the monarchy entered an increasingly uncertain period shaped by illness, succession fears, and fragile public trust, staff members reportedly warned that the underlying conflict could not remain hidden forever. And that is precisely why the coronation portrait suddenly became so much more than a ceremonial photograph. It became a symbol of who truly stood at the emotional center of the monarchy's future, who held influence behind palace walls, and who the institution itself seemed quietly preparing to rally around once the balance of power inevitably shifted. And according to palace whispers, the dispute reached its breaking point during a private planning meeting that was never supposed to leak. The doors were closed, phones reportedly removed. Only a handful of senior aides remained inside the room when the final portrait arrangements were discussed. But what happened during that meeting has now become the subject of intense palace speculation, because several insiders claim Catherine's response stunned even the most experienced royal officials. By that point, tensions inside Buckingham Palace were already simmering beneath the surface, hidden carefully behind public appearances and carefully managed royal messaging. Yet according to multiple palace whispers, the atmosphere inside that private planning session felt different from the beginning. There was reportedly a level of caution in the room that immediately unsettled junior staff members, as if everyone present understood they were stepping into a conversation far more dangerous than simple portrait logistics. Senior aides, portrait coordinators, household representatives, Representatives and communications officials allegedly gathered expecting routine final approvals for the official coronation image. Instead, they reportedly found themselves trapped in the middle of a growing struggle over symbolism, hierarchy, and the future identity of the monarchy itself. Sources familiar with palace operations claim the disagreement centered around the symbolic placement structure proposed for the portrait. While the palace outwardly framed the image as a celebration of royal unity, insiders now suggest every inch of positioning carried deeper meaning about influence and succession. According to various interpretations of the meeting, Camilla's camp allegedly pushed strongly for equal visual prominence beside Catherine, an arrangement some palace officials reportedly viewed as essential to preserving Camilla's authority within the royal institution during Charles's reign. But insiders claim Catherine interpreted the proposal very differently. Reports suggest she quietly questioned the symbolism behind the arrangement, not emotionally, not impulsively, but with a calm firmness that immediately shifted the energy inside the room. Several whispers emerging afterward described the reaction among aides as stunned disbelief because Catherine was known within palace circles for discipline, restraint, and careful adherence to protocol. Yet this time, according to those accounts, she allegedly refused to simply accept the structure being presented to her. And as the silence inside the room reportedly deepened, attention slowly turned toward William. Multiple sources now claim the Prince of Wales became visibly protective during the exchange, allegedly stepping in to support Catherine's concerns as discussions grew increasingly tense. That moment, insiders suggest, transformed what had been framed as a ceremonial disagreement into something much larger and far more threatening to the palace's internal balance. Because if William himself was now resisting symbolic elevation surrounding Camilla's position, then the future king was no longer remaining quietly neutral in the growing divide between both royal households. According to palace whispers, several revisions to the portrait arrangement were suddenly ordered afterward, creating confusion among staff members who had believed the image had already been finalized weeks earlier. Some insiders later described the atmosphere as icy and deeply uncomfortable, with senior aides allegedly avoiding eye contact as the meeting concluded. What frightened palace officials most was not simply the disagreement itself, but the realization that the fracture had now reached a level impossible to fully conceal. Within hours, the communications team reportedly shifted into immediate damage control mode, quietly adjusting schedules, limiting internal discussions, and tightening information access surrounding the portrait release. Yet despite those efforts, royal reporters soon began noticing unusual delays and unexplained alterations to the palace timetable. The silence itself became suspicious. Veteran commentators who had spent decades observing royal operations reportedly sensed something had gone profoundly wrong behind closed doors, even before details began leaking into media circles. And according to insiders, the reason this confrontation shook the institution so deeply was because everyone inside that room allegedly understood the same terrifying truth. This was no longer merely about ceremonial positioning, public optics, or a photograph meant for history books. It had become a warning, sign of a much larger succession struggle already unfolding quietly beneath the surface of the monarchy. But insiders claim this wasn't simply about status inside a photograph it was tied to. Fears about who would dominate the monarchy once Charles could no longer control the balance. As whispers spread through royal corridors, attention quietly shifted toward one man, Prince William. Because according to various interpretations of palace events, the future king was no longer willing to remain neutral. And what happened next reportedly transformed a tense disagreement into a direct struggle over the future structure of royal power itself. For years, William had reportedly operated with careful restraint inside the institution, balancing loyalty to his father with growing awareness that the monarchy's survival would eventually rest on his own shoulders. Palace insiders often described him as cautious, disciplined, and intensely aware of the damage public conflict could inflict upon the crown. But according to whispers now circulating through royal circles, the portrait controversy marked a profound turning point in the way William allegedly viewed the internal balance of power surrounding King Charles. Sources claim he no longer saw the issue as a temporary disagreement between royal households. Instead, Instead, reports suggest he increasingly believed the monarchy was approaching a dangerous crossroads where decisions made behind closed palace doors could shape public trust for an entire generation. Insiders now allege William privately supported Catherine's refusal during conversations that followed the explosive planning meeting. A detail that reportedly sent shockwaves through senior palace staff because it suggested the Prince of Wales had fully aligned himself with his wife's concerns, rather than attempting to preserve neutrality for the sake of institutional peace. According to several interpretations of those private exchanges, William viewed Catherine not simply as his partner, but as the monarchy's long-term stabilizing force at a moment when public confidence remained fragile. After years of royal scandals, family betrayals, and emotional exhaustion surrounding Charles's reign. That belief, insiders whisper, began shaping nearly every strategic decision emerging from William's camp. Reports suggest frustration had already been building quietly among advisors close to the Prince and Princess of Wales regarding Camilla's continued influence within palace operations. Some allegedly feared that the monarchy risked appearing trapped between two competing identities, one rooted in the controversies and emotional wounds of the past, and another centered around the carefully disciplined future image William and Catherine were attempting to build. According to palace whispers, this tension slowly evolved into a widening generational divide inside the institution itself. Younger aides and modern communication strategists reportedly leaned heavily toward protecting Catherine's growing public standing, while older palace figures remained deeply loyal to Charles and Camilla's authority within the current royal structure. And as these divisions intensified, comparisons between both women allegedly became impossible to avoid behind palace walls. Catherine was increasingly portrayed as composed, measured, and instinctively aware of public emotion, while Camilla continued struggling against a complicated reputation that years of official rehabilitation had never fully erased. That contrast reportedly created deep anxiety within certain royal circles, because palace officials understood something the public was only beginning to sense. The monarchy's future popularity might depend almost entirely on William and Catherine's ability to distance the institution from old controversies while presenting a new image of stability, discipline, and emotional credibility. According to sources close to palace operations, William allegedly responded by pushing for tighter control over future royal messaging, particularly surrounding symbolic events, public imagery, and media strategy. Insiders claim he became increasingly determined to protect Catherine from situations that could weaken her future authority or blur the distinction between the monarchy's present and its inevitable future. Yet that effort reportedly terrified many courtiers because they feared a visible split between William's household and Charles's inner circle could severely damage public confidence during an already uncertain period for the crown. Royal commentators soon began openly discussing what some referred to as a transition era, a fragile phase where the monarchy appeared suspended between two generations, two systems of influence, and two competing visions of royal leadership. And while Buckingham Palace desperately tried to maintain the appearance of calm unity, insiders quietly feared the institution was moving toward a confrontation no amount of public relations strategy could permanently contain. But while the palace tried desperately to contain the fallout, one altered image would soon ignite even more dangerous speculation across Britain. When the official coronation portrait was finally released, royal watchers immediately noticed something strange. The smiles looked controlled. The spacing felt deliberate. And according to eagle-eyed commentators, the emotional distance between Catherine and Camilla appeared impossible to ignore. Within minutes, social media exploded with theories the palace could no longer contain. What had originally been intended as a carefully managed symbol of royal unity suddenly became the center of a growing national obsession, because the image seemed to reveal far more than Buckingham Palace had intended. Royal observers began dissecting every detail with almost forensic intensity. The positioning, the expressions, the emotional energy between senior members of the monarchy. Some described the portrait as strangely cold despite its ceremonial importance, while others insisted the tension between Catherine and Camilla felt so visible that no official statement could fully erase it. According to palace insiders, Communications teams monitoring public reaction quickly realized the situation was spiraling beyond ordinary speculation. Reports suggest aides tracked online commentary hour by hour, watching as theories spread across royal media circles, international headlines, and social platforms with astonishing speed. What alarmed palace officials most was the consistency of the public reaction. Thousands of observers who knew nothing about the alleged planning meeting still sensed something deeply uncomfortable beneath the polished surface of the photograph. And once the speculation began, it became impossible to contain. Royal commentators immediately focused on the physical separation between Catherine and Camilla, interpreting the spacing as symbolic rather than accidental. Body language analysts flooded television segments and online discussions with conflicting interpretations. Some claimed the portrait reflected emotional restraint during a difficult transitional period for the monarchy, while others argued it exposed a much larger fracture within the institution itself. Every subtle glance became a subject of debate. Every posture carried alleged meaning. Even the order of placement inside the image was suddenly discussed as though it were evidence in a constitutional investigation. According to various interpretations circulating through royal circles, the photograph had unintentionally become a visual representation of the monarchy's internal struggle over influence and succession. Camilla's critics allegedly framed the image as a symbolic rejection, claiming the distance surrounding her reflected growing resistance from William and Catherine's household. Meanwhile, Catherine's supporters praised what they described as her future queen authority, arguing the Princess of Wales appeared emotionally composed and quietly dominant despite the storm unfolding around her. The contrast between both narratives only intensified the chaos. And behind closed palace doors, insiders claim officials were becoming increasingly concerned that the portrait was no longer being viewed as a celebration of Charles's reign at all. Instead, public conversation had FTD almost entirely toward the future after Charles, the balance of power between royal households, and whether the monarchy was already preparing emotionally for a transition that nobody inside Buckingham Palace wanted openly discussed. According to royal reporters, the palace's refusal to directly address the speculation only fueled even more suspicion. No firm denial emerged. No clarification was offered. The silence itself became interpreted as confirmation that tensions behind the scenes were real. Veteran royal commentators began noting how unusual the communication strategy appeared, particularly for an institution historically obsessed with controlling symbolism and public narrative. And as days passed, the portrait transformed from a ceremonial image into something much darker. A snapshot of a monarchy struggling to hide fractures that were becoming increasingly visible to the outside world. What terrified palace officials most was the realization that the public no longer seemed interested in the coronation itself. Instead, Britain had become fixated on a far more dangerous question: who truly held emotional power inside the House of Windsor, now that the institution were divided between its troubled present and its uncertain future. Yet behind the carefully edited smiles and royal symbolism, insiders claim the monarchy was entering a far more dangerous phase than the public realized. The monarchy has survived abdications, scandals, betrayals, and wars. But according to royal historians, its greatest threats have often emerged not from public enemies, but from private fractures inside the House of Windsor itself. And many now believe the coronation portrait controversy exposed a truth the palace spent years trying to conceal. The future of the crown may already be shifting away from Charles's old alliances and toward a new royal order led by William and Catherine. What began as whispers surrounding a single photograph slowly evolved into something much heavier, something far more unsettling for an institution built on the illusion of permanence. Historians and veteran royal commentators increasingly framed the portrait dispute not as an isolated disagreement, but as the visible symptom of a much larger succession transition already unfolding beneath the surface of royal life. Because throughout modern royal history, moments of emotional distance inside the House of Windsor have often signaled deeper shifts in power long before official announcements ever confirmed them. And according to palace insiders, that is precisely why the controversy surrounding Catherine and Camilla shook Buckingham Palace so deeply. The institution understood the symbolism immediately, even if the public only sensed it instinctively. Catherine was no longer being viewed simply as the Princess of Wales. Reports suggest she had increasingly become the emotional face of the monarchy's future, the figure many inside and outside the palace believed could restore stability, discipline, and trust during a period marked by uncertainty, illness, and internal exhaustion. Her rising popularity reportedly strengthened that perception with every passing month. Crowds responded to her differently. Public reaction around her appearances carried a level of emotional warmth the palace could not ignore. And according to royal commentators, that growing connection between Catherine and the public quietly altered the balance of influence within the institution itself. Yet at the same time, insiders claim Camilla was allegedly fighting to preserve her own relevance too, beside a monarchy that seemed to be emotionally preparing for life beyond Charles's reign. For years, she had worked to solidify her position after enduring decades of criticism and public resentment. But whispers now suggest the coronation portrait controversy reopened old insecurities about legitimacy, acceptance, and long-term legacy. Some palace observers even described the situation as tragically ironic. After spending years trying to secure stability beside Charles, Camilla reportedly found herself facing the terrifying possibility that the monarchy's future emotional center no longer revolved around the king's generation at all. And trapped between these competing forces stood Charles himself. Sources close to palace operations increasingly portrayed the king as emotionally exhausted, burdened not only by illness but by the impossible responsibility of balancing loyalty to his wife against the institutional reality forming around William and Catherine. According to insiders, he desperately wanted unity. He wanted calm. He wanted the monarchy to move forward without another era of public conflict. But behind closed palace doors, aides allegedly began describing an icy peace, settling over the institution, a fragile silence where tensions remained unspoken yet impossible to fully erase. Publicly, the monarchy continued functioning with polished discipline. Ceremonies proceeded. Appearances continued. Statements remained carefully measured. But internally, reports suggest future royal planning increasingly began revolving around the Wales household, with advisors quietly preparing for the next chapter long before anyone dared publicly acknowledge it. And that is why the coronation portrait eventually stopped being remembered as a celebration of Charles's reign. Instead, many insiders now believe it became something far more haunting. A warning sign that the emotional center of royal power was already beginning to shift before the transition itself had officially arrived. Because in the end, the crown was never truly about photographs, titles, or ceremonies. It was about who the nation believed should stand at the center of the monarchy when the cameras finally stopped flashing. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.